Welcome to Leadership Lab, everyone. We have a great episode lined up for you today. If you are in leadership, looking to be able to develop your skills, if you're looking to become a good leader, if you are a woman in business looking to get a leg up and get some tips, do we have the guest for you? She is the first female CEO of a global consulting firm. She is a published author on leadership, now reinvented herself to become a full-time student, learning new skills and giving back to the next generation. We have none other with us today than Pamela Hackett. Pam, great to have you here today. So we were chatting on the phone when we first got connected from a mutual contact of ours, and I just found that conversation so enlightening to hear your journey, your demeanor about it, the things that you believe in and things that you are really passionate about, and just seeing how you just have a spirit of service about you. And so I was really excited to talk to you today and kind of want to see, I think, share what your journey has been to get to this point. And I think, anyone, females out there, as well as, anyone who's in leadership, I think they could take a really big aspect from you today. So start us there, how did you get into that place where you were in a CEO of a big firm?
Yeah, it's hard to think back to that as well. From a personal perspective, I started in consulting, I want to say fresh out of school, but it wasn't. I was the kid who flipped burgers at McDonald's and had no clue what I wanted to do. And all I did was answer. I was in Australia at the time, and I answered an ad in the Sydney Morning Herald that said, "We're looking for consultants." So it's that story where I had to look up and kind of say, what does a consultant do going into businesses? And I'd done a little bit of consulting through being a franchise consultant prior to, applying for a management consulting role. But I sent them a resume in the 1987, 100 years ago, and got this interview. And managed to talk my way into it. You needed a degree. I didn't have one. You needed experience at doing consulting. I didn't have that. But I talked my way into it. And my first project was a mining company in far northwestern Queensland. So I'd never been to that area, and I'd certainly never been into a mine. So it was completely induction, by fire. But really quickly learned what a mining company was all about, and then rapid fire just about any other industry, across the planet. So zero plan, got there, and I was in my early 20s and just thought, wow, okay, I'll figure this out. And that's been, I think, pretty much the story for me, going forward from there. It was, you just had to figure it out.
So what was that like? I mean, being someone so green, coming in and talked your way into it, did you ever have some imposter syndrome where you're like, I don't know if this is going to work out for me? Or was it how did you deal with figuring that out? Were you ever feeling like I need to lean on somebody? Or how did that all play out?
Yeah, I want to say yes to all of that, but that would not be the truth. I think I was just naive enough to not realize the magnitude of what I was doing, that I was physically going into companies and consulting to them without, the depth of experience that you would expect from a deeply experienced business consultant. And so I treated it like you would anything that you've got to learn. And I treated it like a school program. I would spend my nights reading, and I'd talk to people and phone them up and say, I'm doing this consulting work. And I found mining guys that I could talk to. And it was literally just learn quickly. You just had to. But I think it's only much later in life that I thought about that whole concept of imposter syndrome, not in terms of back then, but once you get into these senior roles, and that's when occasionally you might step back and think, oh, okay, this is now quite serious and this is now quite big. But back then, no, I think I was just too naive. I really didn't realize how big a deal it was to have a job where you got on a plane on a Sunday night and went to a completely different part of the country, or what ended up being part of the world, into an industry that you likely had not been in before, and just learned really fast. And you develop that skill.
So I'm so fascinated by that, because I'm thinking, as you're speaking, I'm thinking what I was like when I started in my first company, and it was a Fortune 500 company, but I was in sales. And I remember how I felt, and going into clients, and felt that I don't know if I know what I need to know, because they kind of just said, okay, Brad, here's the stuff. You had 10 days of orientation and training, and then it was like, go get them. And I got thinking to myself, what you're doing was pretty interesting. So what were some of the things that you did or told yourself in that period when you're saying, figure it out, learning and going, and you're and potentially, in a different area that you're not comfortable in, where geography wise, what were some of the things that you did, some skills that you built? Like you said, I built a skill, but what were some of those?
I think you have to kind of look back at the tiny bit of experience that you've got and say, what can I leverage from that, and what can I glean from it? And so, as much as, people will still have a bit of a chuckle with me when I say this, but as a McDonald's kid, if you think about the concept of what a McDonald's restaurant was, it was a highly efficient, profitable business that young people could run. So in Australia, if you were a 20-year-old, you could be running $1 million restaurant. And to do that, you got a huge amount of training from McDonald's. And so, as weird as this sounds, I think every kid in the world should work for McDonald's for that very reason, because they teach you how to, I hope they still do, they teach you how to run a business and how to run it really effectively. And so I had shifted into management consulting that was all about how to run a productive business. And the two sets of skills, what I learned in the long run was, boy, they're the same. They're really similar. And so leverage on what you do know, because there's a huge amount of stuff that is in there that you may not think is valuable that becomes valuable. And then I think just make sure that you've got you're not frightened to ask questions, and you're not frightened to look like you don't know something. So that really did help me. I would talk to anybody. If you were the CEO of the company, it didn't matter to me. I had no concept of hierarchy, ranking. I didn't think that you weren't meant to. I think that's how come I get along with the Gen Z at school now. I've gone back to school full time, but that ability to just say to yourself, they're just a person. And so I'll go ask that person. And it didn't matter what role they were in. There's one tiny little thing that I remember. Remember, this is almost 40 years ago, yeah. But there's one tiny little recollection that I have, is where I walked behind a senior manager's desk one day. So we were in a consulting situation. It was the 80s, where hierarchies did count in hindsight. And so the young consultant would not necessarily be looked at to say it's okay to just walk into somebody's room and then walk behind their desk and start talking to them. But that kind of stuff to me was just normal. You're having a chat with someone. And so I would do that.
And I find that's very powerful, because I think a lot of people today, they get, or at least my experience is that they get a little starstruck with people in certain, there's prestige given there, right? And I think one of the biggest things of being a leader is to break those barriers. And that's something I've always tried to do when I was in management and corporate, when I'm, leading a team now. I don't ever want anyone, sometimes I find people going, well, I won't call you for that. I said, no, do. I'm open to it. If you call them, you call me, that's okay. And I find I always get an odd look, like, really? Like, yeah, because I was there. I appreciate it. And I find that a lot of people, like when you say the CEO or the president of a firm, they're just they're a man or a woman that does the same activities you did, or and they have the same issues you do when they're outside of the workforce. So they're people, and if you can deal with people, you can always interact and engage and find out what that is, right? And that,
agreed.
And being able to ask those questions and learn. So I love that you did that, because I find a lot of people hold themselves back by doing that.
Well, I think also that there's a lot of people in leadership positions that just shouldn't be there, because what they are is managers. And so they're really happy to manage an individual or a team. But when I say manage, I mean manage. And really what they should be doing is manage the processes, manage the work, and lead the people. And I think that that's where inexperienced or managers who haven't quite gotten the leadership game yet, they just haven't figured that out. And so they spend too much time around being the boss instead of being the person. My personal view on what you are when you're the boss is you're the guy who has to just clear all the garbage out from in front of your people. And that's your job. It's not necessarily to manage an individual or a team. It's just to clear all the things that stop them from being great. And if you look at it that way, it's quite a different job. It's not a case of checking up on people or having that barrier between you. It's a case of, hey, what can I do to help you get through the day? What can I do to make sure that you're successful?
It's so interesting you say that, because I end up having a very good role model in my corporate career, and I feel he did that really, really well. He was a part of the group. He was funny. He always wanted to be with them. He was in, you talk about kind of walk the floor. He did that a lot, right? And he was engaging, and it was open door policy. You never felt disconnected. And that was something, and he would roll his sleeves up and do the same and go and help the people, which he didn't need to do in his position. And that really rubbed off on me. And I remember when I went to another firm later and had his position in that firm, people were saying to me, well, why are you going to do that? I was like, because that's what we should do. Like, well, why are you going on that appointment with those people? Like, why are you teaching them to prospect? And it's because, well, the manager is busy with someone else, so I'll go do it. And I found it just helped me be able to be really connected with the group. And when you can show kind of how people are doing that first, like you're kind of a lead first person and do it first leader. A do it first leader leading from the front, I find adds a ton of respect for the people that you're leading, and they go, okay, like he or she is one of us.
Yeah.
Which is there's a simpatico there. There's definitely a different energy.
And they understand the nature of the work. I was speaking to a woman the other day who is leading another consulting firm, and it was interesting because she said something that is really spot on. She said, today when I meet a lot of managers, I realize they've actually not touched the work in so many years that their ability to improve it is really limited. And, that's why you need to work at the coalface, really with the frontline guys, if you want to do something better or different with your business. If you don't do that, you're just going to get some old guy's, previous view of what's going on, which may or may not be right.
Well, especially today, as things change so much, like how we do things and processes have changed just in the last 5 years substantially compared to what they used to be.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine doing old antiquated processes like that. Yeah. It's a huge point. So you worked your way. You talked your way in. You figured a lot of things out. You became very good at this. Did you ever envision, I'm going to be CEO of this place one day?
Oh, never, no. And even the day that I got a call saying, "How about you pick up the CEO role?" Literally, I was just so surprised. Yeah, it wasn't something that I was aiming for, and nor would I have thought that my skill set would have been that. I had come through as a consultant, spent 30 years with the business, a couple of hiatuses occasionally, but just about the whole 30 years with the business all over the world in some, I don't know now, I guess 50 or 60 countries that I worked in. And 30 years to the year, 2017, I got a call from a board member saying, do you think that you could do what you've done in our Asian business and our European business for the total business? And so at first I thought, I wonder if I can. But the business was also in decline in the rest of the world. And so that was why the board had leaned on me and said, do you think you could? So really all I could say was, I'll give it my best shot. This was a business that was 70 odd years old and had hit a wall in terms of growth. And so it was a little bit for women, we know what happens when a business is struggling. that's when the more creative thinking may come in, and when you may ask a woman to lead as a CEO, because you can kind of say, and this is what I've learned in hindsight, you can kind of say, well, if it doesn't work, we can say, well, we gave that a shot. We put the girl into the job, and then it's the luck of the draw whether it works or not. So I've got a little bit of a cynical view on some of the circumstances under which a woman gets the role. It is often, if a business is in trouble, that's probably the time that companies have said, let's put a woman into the job. But I'd come through the organisation where just about every role I'd taken, I was the first woman in it. And so I was very used to it. And just that, I guess that chutzpah just to say, yeah, okay, I'll give this a shot. In hindsight, is it the right thing to do? I'm never quite sure about that one. But I think if you want to have a solid career as a woman, at some point you do have to just say, I'll give it my best shot. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay too.
So that's fascinating. So you did each role that you had like, what were some of the biggest challenges in doing that? In each role that you had, you were the first woman in the firm to have it. What sort of resistance, what sort of challenges did you have in those roles?
Yeah, you can imagine in consulting, it's a very male-dominated environment. And so there's a challenge just by waking up in the morning and being a woman. It really doesn't matter sometimes what you do. You're in the wrong body for some people in business. And whether that's the people that you're working with or your bosses or the clients, it can be a little bit of a challenge just navigating that. I think where the most interesting thing is to simply step back and say, it's not going to look through that lens. And so it was only when I got into the CEO role that I actually looked through that lens. And so prior to that, I would not come away from a meeting where I'd think, they would never say that to a man. Whereas once I got into the CEO role, then things really changed. And you could really see that change of demeanor from a lot of the people that you worked with or were around. And even the senior people in how they would deal with you as a woman in the CEO role. I'll give you one really interesting example. When the firm announced that I was going to take over the role, I had two old-timers who had been associated with the business. Neither of them actually worked for the company anymore, but they were both senior guys previously. One of them chose to write a letter to the board and tell the board, I think he used the word idiotic, what an idiotic thing that was to put this woman into the role. So that was one kind of one scenario. And then right at the other end of the scale was another guy who had been with the businesses as a vice chair before he retired, who called me and said, Pam, this is going to be a really, really tough job. It's going to be a big job for you. How can I help? And that's the extremes of what I think most women have to deal with. And I'm still great friends with, his name is Alan Steelman, former US congressman, opened up the Australian business for this company. So I met him 30 years ago. We'd always kept in touch. He'd always been an ally and a very strong ally to women. And then that call really, that's the kind of call that gives a woman hope and says, you know what, there's a ton of men out there who can really help. And there are. For every one bad apple that is like the guy who sent that letter, there's always a good guy. And you just have to sort through and figure it out and then put your energy into them. And so I learned really quickly, don't put the energy into that guy. At first, it was a little uncomfortable to see things like that. And it was before social media really took off, so you didn't get all the online hate that's out there today. But then you just have to wake up and say, you know what, it's not me. This is actually a problem with that guy. And that's okay.
That is so true. And I think just even in interactions with clients or people think, oh, it's me, or people are saying no to me, but it's really they're not saying no. They're just, it could be not now. It could be,
Yeah.
it could be their issue they need to deal with. So what were some of the things that, you realized you had that epiphany of, it's not that I'll pour my energy. There's plenty of people out there that are going to help me, plenty of men that are going to help me. What would you say to someone a woman who's inspiring to be, kind of like the path that you took? Like, I want to be someone that really is a person in a company, in a firm. I want to accelerate my career and where I'm feeling I need to work harder than the male next to me. What would you say to a female like that? And what were some tips you could give?
I think you do have to work harder. So I don't sugarcoat it at all. And I think that you do also, though, have to put yourself out there. And I think a lot of it is down to your own, what you're comfortable with. So the women that I've seen be successful, and they don't have to have big gregarious personalities. They can be the quietest introvert on the planet, or people who are a bit more chatty. If we weren't sitting here quietly today, you'd see that that's not me. I'm the chatty kind. But I think that you have to just make sure that you have presence. That Alan Stillman, when he used to describe me as someone who I could still come into a room and have presence, even though I was the girl in the room and the only woman. It was because I'd come in I'd do my work, I'd know what I was going to talk about, and I'd present what I was going to talk about. And I didn't back down if I really believed in something. I think that we have to be careful there, because that's when you cross into the whole women are emotional. And a lot of that is we're just super passionate sometimes, just really believe in something, and that's how it comes across. And I think with the allies, that's something that's recognizable. So I had board members who were supportive, who looked and said, yeah, what the business needed today was somebody who could stand their ground and really get things moving. And I would think that that's how they would have described me for then. Yeah.
And you mentioned a turnaround. What did you mean by that?
A turnaround as in the business?
Yeah.
It was in bad shape.
CEO, yeah.
Yeah, it was really in bad shape. It had a couple of years of a large decline in revenues, and it had gone from highly profitable to not. And that's all public information, so I can't get in trouble for saying that. And so it needed a real change in the way that the business ran. Think about today and what Canada's facing. And I'm thinking about how many turnarounds are now going to have to happen, and what people will do to be able to get through that. And you've really got a couple of choices. You can batten down the hatches, go into 90s, crash and, just slash and burn, take all your cost out. And in the process of doing that, arrive somewhere with a lot of collateral damage and a lot of people who are not happy and a lot of job losses, and you may or may not get the results that you really want. Or you can take a slightly different perspective and get really close to your teams and look to them to help do something with the business that will change it. And I think that's what, most businesses that are affected by everything that's going on today, going into that slash and burn 90s, kind of productivity drive is not the answer. It's a new world. It's a turn the page moment. And you have to really look to the business and say, what are we going to do differently? What is that? What's the big opportunity that this new world presents that we can now reconfigure, reimagine, change our business to suit that? And so for me, I was, I've always been Little Miss hyper, motivated and looking at things and saying, what can we do differently? What's the big thing that would change the outcome? And sometimes that's quite small. It might just mean treating people differently, or it might mean completely reconfiguring the business, going into different markets, going into different products, whatever it is. But I think that's what's necessary, is to step back and say, there's a traditional way of looking at this, or there's a way where you say, it's not business as usual, it really is different. And this new world that we're entering into requires very different things. So what are we going to do differently? How are we going to rise to that?
So 'cause you've had a ton of experience with a lot of different firms globally in different markets. So they've gone through these challenges, all the noise that's happening around us today in Canada. What would you say to people? Because there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear out there right now. So, I mean, when you see that and how are we going to look at things differently? Do you see these, you said opportunities, which I love the outlook on that, where I would argue that I think a lot of 80% of Canadians out there are kind of more on the fear side right now versus looking at opportunity. What would you say to the Canadians out there and people like, aspiring people in business looking to get going in their career here in Canada? What would you say there with regards to what's happening now?
Yeah, so I do think it's okay to be a little frightened, just because you'd be naive to not look at it and say, whoa, holy moly, what are we really going to do? I'd use a different phrase there because I'm Australian, but holy moly will do the trick. What are we really going to do? But I think that you have to look at it, and there's a great phrase. I wish I could remember who said it, but it's around look at what's strong, not what is wrong, and then use what's strong to fix what's wrong. And so I think it's really easy to critique and to come up with everything that you're against, but it is super hard to say, so what am I for? What is it that I'm really going to do differently and get behind? And what is my big opportunity? And I think people need to put way more effort into that and not stumble, immediately into the litany of what's wrong, because they will find a mountain of that. And it is really hard to dig yourself out of that mountain once you've got it. And so if you can go more around, let's figure out what are the bright spots here? What are we really good at? And then come back and say, okay, what's the stuff that's going to stop us from getting there, from leveraging what we're strong at, or or really moving toward what we want to go to. So I think there's a mismatch in the lens that a lot of people look through. And I think that, if you go onto social media at the moment, there's a huge amount of what's wrong with Canada, with the world, with whatever it is. And when you read the comments, it's, and another thing, and another thing, and another thing. And really what we should be saying is, okay, let's draw the line. Let's look at where the strengths are, and let's come up with and here are all the other strengths, and here are all the things we need to start looking at from a solution perspective. So that's one thing that I would do a little differently than I think than some of the things that I'm hearing right now from some of the execs. Yeah,
I think it's very much like you say, and I think anybody even developing, if you think, I think a lot of people, even if they're looking at their own personal skill, if they're looking at their own situation, everybody focuses on what's not working well versus what is a strength. And I think all of us kind of get caught in that, like you say, litany of, we have to do so much. Yeah. There's so much of it, right? Where you don't. It's like if you make progress and improvement, little changes can make a big, big difference.
Yeah.
I use this analogy with my team, and I said, if you drive on the highway and you just turn the wheel like a tenth of a degree, you're barely turning it.
Yeah.
But if you kept on that radius for the next 10 miles, you're going to end up in a completely different destination than you would have otherwise. But people think we got to do a full turn, right? So I think that in objectively in a corporation and just even people's where individuals are in their skill set growth, in their career growth, that's a huge thing to know. Like, you're not as far off as you think you are to seeing some drastically different results, right? Yeah. It's just picking one thing and starting to work on that, and then work on the next one, and step by step.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to take the elevator to the top, but you got to take it step by step, right?
Yeah, agreed. Did you ever do any work with Edward de Bono's 6 Thinking Hats?
No, I haven't.
So it's years old, and Edward de Bono is since passed. So, but he was a great thinker, and what he really said was there's this group of different colors to look through in terms of a lens. So if you think of red is more around crisis, and my colors may not match up to him because it's been such a long time since I've thought about him. But the one thing that I really took away from it, he said, never start with the black hat, Because if you start with the black hat, you can never dig your way out of that, and you won't change the mindset of the people in the room. So start with the yellows, the greens, the hats that make you look at what is right, and then come back to the black. And what he really said was that people tend to think in a real hodgepodge, all these different things, and you have to separate it out, and you have to go down a lane and then change lanes, so that you're really thinking through all of the different parameters that are out there. And I think that some of that is what we need to do today. I think that kind of look at all the different areas, the different lenses that you have to look through, and use that black hat thinking, that more negative, what's wrong with this picture, to make those things better, not to simply do the analysis. So I think that's an important thing. Notwithstanding, a lot of companies today just need to make sure that they batten down the hatches, save their cash, have their little war rooms going and all of that kind of stuff. But at the same time, you can't just keep doing business as usual. It really is a time where you've got to rethink the business.
And then so with your experience in all the different cycles you've dealt with in economies and in businesses, I mean, I know you don't have a crystal ball with what's going to happen right now, but what do you see in your opinion as how this is starting to develop?
Ooh, that's a big question. I think a lot of industries are going to hurt. I think that there are going to be a lot of job losses. I think that we are going to go through a really difficult time. I mean, I went through I don't know how old you are, but I went through the recession in Canada. I arrived in Canada in 1990. So I think it was late 80s, 90s, the big recession here. So I think it is that kind of a moment that we're going to live through, just because of the unpredictability and the change in mindset, because we're already seeing, irrespective of the tariffs that might hit, you're already seeing a change in the business, in the consumer thinking, all of that. So that's having an impact, whether something else happens from down south or not. So that said, I think it's going to be tough times. However, I also think that is an opportunity, because every cycle that we go through, a new set of businesses come out of it, a new way of working comes out of it. So we've got to figure out how to protect the people that get negatively impacted, at the same time figure out how to upskill a whole bunch of people, because that is the real key here. And then a concurrent, again, make sure that we've got a plan for the future, whether it's country, company, community. It's such a big, big change. If it wasn't such a tragic moment through my lens, a tragic moment in the magnitude of what we're seeing from a democracy perspective, I'd say it's a big opportunity to really change a country and change it in a positive manner. It's just a pity that it's being driven by such a difficult push. Yeah,
it's funny because I grew up just from the lens that I was growing up in and the people that are around, that recession was a bad thing. And of course, I mean, it's not everybody wants to be in boom times, but recessions are necessary, right? So everybody needs, it's kind of like our sleep. You could run all day, you could be doing your thing and having a great, very productive day, but you need to sleep because you need to recharge. Sometimes the economy needs to recharge. The companies need to recharge. We need to do those. So it's great. I love that you said opportunity, because I now view a recession. I used to view it with fear because I wasn't in the workforce. I was just viewing it from being a young person. But now seeing it going, okay, if you look at many different industries, they've had their pullbacks where they've, real estate, mortgage over the last little while, the energy in 2015 in Canada, they've all had that place. And it's an opportunity for them to, okay, when things are going really well, we have a lot of, things that we can just have under the rug because things are just going well, so we're not going to fix it. But when things pull back or we recess, you get an opportunity to assess, and you're like, okay, where are those opportunities? What can we do better? How we can come out of this? Because we know we will come out of it, and then you can come back stronger and grow bigger. But I think a lot of people get so focused and fixated on this short-term moment, and they get paralyzed a little bit with the fear and anxiety of it, and natural. But this is an opportunity. What skills, what things could you level up? What ways could you restructure or what markets could you be in that you're not in now, and how you can come out stronger and more galvanized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that is how we have to look at it. I mean, we all got through the financial crisis hit the consulting industry horribly at first, and you would think that that would be a time when consultants would do great. But no, companies, a lot of those consulting companies really struggled because companies just stopped spending on that. And they switched to only the massive brand names, the McKinseys of the world, who could help them strategize and things like that. So it was a really, really difficult time. Equally, the pandemic, the same thing. Whole industries got affected by the pandemic. Mine almost came to a standstill because our type of consulting was boots on the ground. You had to get on a plane, go to a site, work with a client at site. And so suddenly 80% of the business was gone. Then you learn how to do something different, and that's really what I think. You can sit on your pity potty all you want of everything that's wrong, but you have to find what's right. Otherwise, you're going to just wallow in the misery.
Yeah, great point. So speaking of what's right, you did, you went and you authored a book. You did a book, Manage to Engage, How Great Managers Create Remarkable Results. What inspired you to do that, and what were some of your key takeaways in that process?
Yeah. So that came straight out of the pandemic. It was a point in time when everything really did change, and suddenly employee engagement went up, and that was a great thing. Put all the tragedy aside of the pandemic, it was a great thing that we saw people really come together and change whole industries, whole businesses for the better. And so I got during my consulting career, I had leaned very much into the people side. My big belief is that the success of a company sits in the hands of the frontline supervisor, how they engage their teams. If your team is behind you, you're going to get great results. If you're a crappy manager who can't really lead them, you're not going to get great results. So those guys are almost like the little pot of gold within a company, and they get misplaced and forgotten about. And yet they're the guys who really do make a difference. So my view on the pandemic was, what can we do to capture that moment? Because you look at today, there's still 4 out of 5 people don't like work. That's a huge statistic. That's frightening. 80% of the world doesn't like working. And if you talk to the Gallups of the world, they will tell you because they don't like their boss. And so that boss is generally that frontline supervisor. They have the most people. And so I just thought it was time to put something that was a bit more pragmatic. What can a frontline guy really do differently that will better engage their people? And so I spent time digging into that. I was really fortunate. I was working in a business where I had almost 1 million people that I could analyze from having gone into companies and looked at how they were working, and then what did we change, how they led, how they managed every day, and then what results they got. What was the real thing that clicked? What made the difference? And it was really, I should ask you, what do you think would make the difference? Because it was really simple, and not a lot of people understand or think about what it could be. So if you think about the one thing that a supervisor, a manager, a team leader can do is what we talked about at the beginning, and that's do something that really relates to their people. Get out in front of their guys and clear the road and be actively involved in the business. And that was the one determining factor of success, was getting people supervisors to actually be engaged themselves with their teams and their people. And people don't know how to do that oftentimes. And so in the work I did in consulting, it was all about teaching people to understand what it means to engage with their people. And so that's what the book was really to do, was to just put a pragmatic solution behind something that can sound very soft and fluffy of employee engagement. So I'll give you one really, really simple example for that. And it's that concept of checking in versus checking up. It's really easy for a boss to check up on someone and ask them, where they're at with their numbers. It's really tough for a lot of people simply to knock on the door of someone's office or, go along the production line and say, how's it going? How are you doing today? How's the job? And how's your career? But split that into 3 different conversations. So 1, 5, 30. Once a day, just check in and say to somebody, how are you doing? Not how's the job doing, but how are you doing? And then 5 is once a week, talk about the job. How's your results going? What can we do to help? How can things get better? And then once a month, 30, let's talk about your career. And if you can nail that rhythm, that 1, 5, 30, that gets you past what a lot of people think is active management, which is micromanagement. So if you can step away from being a micromanager and just simply be active in the business, understanding what's going on and chatting with your teams, what a difference that would make.
That is tremendous. I love that 1, 5, 30. And I found it's interesting because when I became a manager for the first time, I actually turned it down 5 years in a row. It's because I was like, why? I was an independent contributor. I had autonomy. And I'm like, why do I want to do that? And the adage around people that were successful individual contributors was, and again, this is the wrong way to come into a management and the mindset, but it was, why do I want to wipe noses and change diapers?
Yeah.
Right. And that's how people look at
it.
And I said the same thing. I have autonomy here. I could do what I want. Why do I want to do that? Then I did decide in year 6 when they came around again, I said, I will take it. And it was someone that said something that triggered to me. I'm like, I should probably get these leadership skills and do this. I fell in love with developing people and watching them, learning about them, finding out what made them tick. How could I help them see what they could not see and help them develop skills and be. I fell in love with it.
Yeah.
And I get to do it now, kind of on steroids in my new career with not being able to do it in my own business, which is awesome. But what I found though is when you do those questions that you said, when you do the engaging, a lot of what's going on comes out in conversation where it's kind of like even in prospecting, like in sales. I always say to people, if you ask them specifically about your product, like, how is that with your current situation? They go, we're good. I always give the analogy to my team. Like if Rogers called me and I answer my phone and I'm talking with you, we're walking across the street and I pick it up and the person says, Brad, can I talk to you for 2 seconds about your account? And I'm like, no, I'm good. He may be offering me or she may be offering me the sports package for free for a year, which I would take, but I don't hear them out because my knee-jerk reaction is to say, I'm good.
Yeah.
So are our people. They often say, if we're asked directly, like, hey, but as you get to have meaningful conversations with them, oftentimes those things come out that you realize, like the in between the lines that you go, and with your experience, you go, I know that's not good. Here's it comes out that they're struggling with something and maybe the guard's going down and it can really lead you to how you can help them. Have you seen that a lot?
Yeah. So I always talk about that as earning the right to have a conversation with somebody. If you parachute in as the boss who doesn't spend a lot of time connecting with their people, you never earn the right to ask somebody to improve their performance or even to try doing something new. In fact, just something that came to mind, I worked with unusually a mining company as well, but they were putting in place the little devices that are anti-fatigue. And all you have to do is click it on and it's on. They were not having a good time getting their guys to do that one little motion. And when you talk to them about how their managers spent their time, their guys were not on the floor. They were not interacting with their teams. So they hadn't really earned the right to ask the guys to do something. And your average guy, big burly miner would look at you and say, nah, you don't have a clue what's going on in my world. I don't need that. But if you spend time with your people, what a difference that makes. And then you earn the right to be able to say, hey, can we take a look at this and can we do something a little bit different here? And what do you think? So, yeah.
And so when you're engaging people like that and you're getting their feedback, what do you feel like that brings to the table with regards to productivity, belief in the organization, maybe retention? How vital is that?
All of the above. So the companies that do really, really well are the guys who practice that. They're active with their teams. and they'll have engagement scores in the 70s, or even more. Whereas the guys who don't do it, their engagement scores will sit in the 20s and 30s. So it's an absolute correlation. It's absolutely the two are related. The ability to really engage with your people gives you the results. So from a financial perspective, a performance perspective, all of that, there's a benefit in really making sure that your guys know, your people know how to lead teams. In fact, I would say that of all of the initiatives that companies do, you could spend millions on new technology, you could put in place new systems, processes, all of that, notwithstanding some technology that, yes, you do need to use, but all of that, if you actually put that on hold and you just made your manager into a great manager, you would get your productivity increase and you would get the changes in the business that you want.
That's really fascinating, those numbers. How do you do that? So how would you develop that in a leader?
Spend time with them. So now go back to my early days in consulting, and I would spend all of my time on a project with my client on the floor with their people. And that was a bit of a new concept when I first started in consulting, but something that we never changed. And so it didn't matter if it was a mine, a bank, the maintenance guys at Air Canada, a liquor store in the UK, you would spend time with the frontline supervisors and you would start to talk to them about how they spend their time. And if you talk to someone and ask that question, how do you spend your time? Then one of about 2 or 3 things will happen. First thing is they will always say that they're spending too much time on admin meetings, reporting, meeting with their boss. The next thing they'll talk about is they spend a lot of time on crisis, of having to fix problems rather than prevent them. And then the last thing that they'll say is, I don't spend nearly enough time with my people. And so I don't know why I'm talking about colours again, but if you can colour your day, if you can just sit back and say, how am I spending my time? And just grab a little log. And so again, a pragmatic solution, if I were a frontline supervisor today, I'd be saying, okay, let's call yellow admin, let's call green where I'm interacting and I'm engaging with my team. Red is crisis, just colour your day and take a look at it and do it for a week. And then look at it and say, how have I spent my week? And then look at your results and ask yourself, do the two fit? Because it's more than likely, if you're not an experienced active manager, that the colour around that day is going to have a lot of yellow in meetings, in admin, and a lot of red, a lot of fixing things, but not a lot of just, hey, let's walk the floor together and talk about what's going on today. And then, even in a remote world, you can still do the same. You can still check in with your people and work from home.
I think it's interesting because I do believe I fundamentally believe in things are caught, not taught. Or I should say there's definitely things that are taught, but there's a lot that's actually caught. And being in that environment, being around those people is so vital. Do you think part of if you were saying to someone who's looking to become a leader, looking to get in a management position, I talk to a lot of people that I'm looking to bring into our business too, and their aspirations are that they want to be a leader, they want to be a manager, they want to learn those skills, they want to be able to have that position one day and wherever they're going to be. What would you say to those people that are trying to work to that position? What would be the best thing that they could spend their time and their thought and energy on right now?
So I'm a big believer that you've got leaders at every level. And I think that we have to democratize leadership. I think that the old world of, the world's very flat now. So that middle layer has gone away over the 30 years that I was in consulting. And that middle manager role is really tough to figure out now because those guys, in some instances, they don't have a clue what their real role is anymore. You've got senior guys who are going direct to people. You've got juniors who want to talk to the senior guys. What's that middle manager role? So there's some work to be done on all of that. But the flatter you can make the business and make it still more interesting, still give people a way to make money that's not tied to having to manage a group of people, and democratize leadership. So what I mean by that is give people the ability to lead. Make sure you push the information to the front line. You don't need it to go through a boss. It's so easy now just to have real-time information and allow people to make decisions based on that information. And again, it doesn't have to come through a boss or be, negotiated or just, I want to say it should be discussed, but it's not a case of simply waiting to be told what's the data today. You're in a world where that data can be real time and in your hands on your phone immediately, which gives people the ability to make decisions themselves, and it negates that role of a manager in the traditional sense. So if I were if I were leading a company today, instead of being at school, I would be saying, let's make sure that the manager's role is truly to get the best out of their people, not to manage people. And let's make sure that our frontline guys can be leaders, allow them to have access to anybody in the business to make their job more effective and to get better results. And that's how I would really look at it today. I think that, especially with Gen Z coming through, they want to be like I was in the 80s in consulting. They want to know the CEO. They want to be able to go chat with him and say, this is what I think is wrong, with the business. And rightly so, why not? They're the guys who are dealing with everything every day. So there's a big rethink around roles and responsibilities, I think, that has to go on. But for a frontline person, get access to information, make sure that you're using it in a way that's productive, and then look at that information and say, what does it tell me that I can do differently in my business today? And then how do I take that to my boss so that I can show I'm in the business, I'm with you, I've got your back, I'm building this business. And the same with our senior guys in reverse. They need to have the backs of their people.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, because I feel if a lot of people today, they're getting into leadership, they want to do it because of title. Mm-hmm. They want to do it because of prestige. They want to do it because they don't want to do some of the nitty-gritty stuff or if you want to call it the in the trenches stuff anymore, which that's a big mistake. And like you said, a lot of people that are too far distanced as they exceed in their career up the corporate ladder, they lose that touch. So how can they really impact it in the first place?
Yeah.
That's really a huge distinction. And I think when you do that, you're going to get a lot of goodwill with your staff and with your employees, and empowering them, helping them is going to be building that leadership within it. I think that's a huge thing.
Yeah.
So you mentioned school. Now you've left that corporate world temporarily for now, and you've gone into to be a full-time student. How did this come to pass?
I like how you say temporarily. At the age of 61, it may not be temporary.
Yeah.
It's a precursor to a third act. So I after 5 years of being in the CEO role, I woke up and loving my job for the 35 years I'd been in this business and doing consulting. I woke up one day and thought, I really hate my job. And this isn't right. And it's not me. I don't enjoy this anymore. It's a difficult thing to wrestle with when you've loved your job. And so I knew that I had to walk away from it. Actually, you've just sparked, you asked me at the beginning about being a woman in leadership. One interesting thing that happened that I thought was a real challenge as a CEO was the person who was in the CEO role prior to me remained with the business and became chairman. And so as a woman, I would suggest gently to any woman who was in that situation not to take a CEO role if the incumbent who had positioned the business, wherever it was still there, because that means that you're always going to have a little bit of a friction that shouldn't be in the business, particularly for a turnaround. So it's probably the wrong time for someone to become a CEO if that were to happen. And that's probably not just for women, it's for anybody. So in hindsight, I wouldn't have done that because therein lay some of the friction. Very difficult to do a job when you've got the incumbent still in the business and they're the chairman. So that was my challenge and what made me start to feel it was less enjoyable than it should have been. So I woke up one day and thought, I think it's time to finish doing this and I need to think about something else. for a nanosecond, I thought about moving into other consulting firms. And I did some interviews with some of the big guys, really interesting to chat with them, lots of things that I learned that would be different than what I was doing. And then I woke up and said, geez, I don't want to do that again. My consulting days are done. I want to reskill. So then I had to go into, what is it? A little bit like what I said earlier. What's that big opportunity that's out there? What will really help me to be able to, because my mum's 90, I might live another 30 years. So what am I going to do that's different? And then I looked at the world of, there were two things that struck me. One is I didn't understand enough about politics, so I wanted to get up to date on that. And I didn't think that the world of journalism, media, was enabling the world to do what it had originally set out to do, which is stand up to power, put out truthful information. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool just to learn how to do that and really get a new skill set, build off a little bit of what I had. I could write, I could present, I was used to doing a lot of different things. But what if I could just get a new skill set? And so I applied to school just like every other kid and got accepted. Yeah.
So 61-year-old student.
Yep. Yeah.
But this is where you're supposed to not learn anything anymore and you're just riding off in the sunset. Isn't that what's supposed to happen?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, two things. I spent a lot of money just by being alive. And so I didn't want to go into a budget mode. So I thought, okay, I still need to do something. I don't want to do what I'm doing, learn something new and apply it. And so I'll probably be able to get some work in a different field. So that was a little bit of the behind, kind of thinking behind me. But every day, oh my goodness, am I learning? Just every single day. And it's either the academic curriculum, and remember, I'd never gotten a degree the first time around. So I had to learn how to write an essay. I had to really learn some basic things. I now know that I have zero grammar or spelling ability. Apparently someone else has done that for me all my life. So I'm learning all of that. But the big thing that I'm finding super, super interesting and cool is understanding Gen Z and just spending time with them. And what a dynamo group of kids. I say kids, they're all young adults. But how great is it to spend time with these young people and recognize that for all of the, every generation, the moral panic is, oh my goodness, the kids are lazy and, they're not pulling their weight and they expect too much. These kids, they have the world on their shoulders and they get up every day and do it again. Go back to school, they get their next essay done, they go have jobs, they have social lives, they have the problems of growing up. And so I have a new sympathy, a new empathy for the Gen Z.
So what are you picking up the most from them? What are you learning from them that you're like, I did not know and I wish? So like what's part of that empathy?
Yeah, I don't know if it's an I didn't know more than it is a recognition. So, I hope coming out of one of the small things that I've kind of put as my own personal goal of being at school is there an opportunity to lend a hand to any of these, young adults in any way, whether it's opening doors for them, using some of my experience or doing some startups, just working with them, whatever it is. But I think, I think there is something I learned. Yeah, I had a young girl come to me yesterday and I'm organising a International Women's Day breakfast at my house. So I'll have 50 of these young adults come on a week on Saturday. They'll come to the house. I've organised a couple of cool women, dynamo women, to speak. It's just a couple of hours, and it's just to get them really together and, think about being a woman in their careers going forward. And so I'm chatting with a lot of them, and I don't know all the kids. And so yesterday there was one girl who didn't know that this event was on. And I said to her, geez, I'm really sorry. I just don't know everybody. And the girl to my left said to me, but Pam, everybody knows you. And I'm like, of course, I stand out, even speak like them now. I'm like, I stand out like a sore thumb. I'm the little old lady in class. And she said, no, she said, we all know you because you're kind. And so when I explored that, I think it just means that, and I'm not sure I would have been described that in my previous life, I would have been described as fair, a bunch of things, but I'm not sure if kind would have been the word. And I'm very proud that that's the word. And I think when I explored that is I take the time to connect with the kids when they do, with the students, when they do something great. I recognize it and say to them, oh my goodness, that was phenomenal. You did a really good job at that. And I'm always comparing and thinking, I wonder what I did when I was that age, because I don't think I was that smart, and a professor will ask a question and my brain is still processing that question, and the student is already, answering it and they've run 3 blocks with it. And I think, oh my goodness, I can't keep up, with that. But it's just every day is a little bit of a learning experience in all different ways.
It's amazing because there's definitely a give and take there where you're giving so much to them and they're appreciating it, and then they're giving so much to you, and they probably don't even feel that, but you really are.
Yeah, I hope so.
I remember when I was in university, I had a very big course. It was a big part of our mark, and I was going. Third year was to be studying in a school abroad for the year, and you needed this. If you didn't get this course, you weren't happening. So it wasn't happening. So I was very stressed about it. And there was a gentleman who was retired, and he was in the class, and nice guy, same thing. We were feeding off him, learning, but I got paired with him for this project, and I was like, man, like he's off campus. But then what turned out to be what at the beginning I thought was going to be a bit of a nuisance for me, ended up being some of the best advice I carried the rest of my life so far. And he just gave me a different perspective on business. He turned out to be a successful businessman. We didn't know that in the class, but I spent some time with him and his wife, and went to their house, and then he just shared some of these things and insights that has helped me in perspective for the rest of my life. And I'm like, thank God that gentleman was placed
you met him
in that class, right? So just for you, I think you're probably getting a lot of people saying the same thing about you.
I hope so. Early days, I'm 18 months into it, so year 2, another 2.5 to go. So, but I hope so. Yeah. I think one of the things I'd love to do is figure out how to, so there's a bunch of incubators and things like that at school. But to do that, you need to be a student with an idea, and not every kid has an idea. And so I think, are there other opportunities that you can take to help these young people get a start that might not be, starting a big idea business, but just might be that one neat thing on their resume that will get them, an extra little bit of a experience or skill set or something. So appropriately, I hope, I'm sure the students don't think this, we started a podcast called 100 Reasons to Vote. And the idea is to interview absolutely anyone we possibly can and ask them for what their idea is in terms of why they vote. Because there's a lot of young adults who don't vote. And I think they all have ideas, they've all got opinions, and they'll go march on the streets, but they won't necessarily go put their ballot in a box. And so with the students, and there's about 10 kids involved, we've put together this podcast called 100 Reasons to Vote. And it's little things like that I hope when I look back after 4 years, I can say, okay, we started this, we did this, or whatever. And who knows, we might start a business startup together, and that will be my third act. Yeah, but it'll be interesting.
You're planting seeds. You're planting positive seeds.
Yeah, I hope so.
This is awesome.
Yeah. And I think they're all talent. Everyone's got a different talent. And you really, when you spend time with the students, you really can spot it. You look at the different personalities and think, okay, this kid is going to be a superstar in this area, and that's the beauty. I try really hard not to be the CEO in the room, not to be the grandma age in the room, and just to look at it like I'm a kid. And so that way you're not critiquing, there'd be so many things I think that would drive me nuts if I still had my CEO brain on. But I do look at them and think, this kid, he would have been, or she would have been great in this role when I was in business. Yeah.
I don't get the grandma vibe from you at all. I think you got the energy, you've got all that. I think I think you have that.
Someone said to me the other day, Pam, why do you say how old you are? And I'm like, say your age. It's fine. You know, there's women and men out there who can do fabulous things at whatever age.
Yeah. Well, you think about it too. A lot of people, like I was joking earlier, going, well, this is when you're supposed to be in the twilight. But like you said, 30 years.
Yeah.
That's 30 years that you have, and you've already had so much that you developed, and imagine the compounding that can go from there on new skill set and things. It's really, but a lot of people just ride out early.
I was going to say, can you imagine doing that? I just can't.
No.
I think, how could I get up every day without a plan?
Yeah.
You know, or without something to learn, or I think I'm kind of pushing it to the extreme, doing, you know, essays every night and writing stories and whatever it is that's due this. You know, I must have 4 things due this week, and I get as stressed as the kids, you know. And I'm comparing my marks and my grades. What did you get? And I learned that they don't talk about that publicly. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm going back to when I was in my 20s in consulting, where things didn't dawn on me. I'm living that all again. Yeah. You know,
my daughter comes back and she's 13, but she comes back with her mark and she goes, "It's a 3." I'm like, "What is a 3?" Like, you did
what is a 3? Yeah. She's like, but it's out of 3.
I'm like, okay, so it's in the range. I'm like, okay, what percentage is it? It's in. I'm like, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a different game. Yeah. So if you could go back in time and to you know, early 20s Pam, and say, hey, what advice would you tell her?
Do you know, I probably would have gotten a degree back then, and I've never thought that. I did just fine without one. But some of the things I'm learning now, I think, geez, I wish I knew that 100 years ago, you know. So one of the things would have been take the time to take that extra little bit of time to get that well-rounded education that you don't get coming out of high school. I got fabulous education in business, you know, every job that I ever had. But yeah, there's a lot of days where I think, whoa, I wish I'd known that, you know, or I wish I'd taken that class. So I'd probably say get a degree, as much as a year and a half ago, I would never have said that. I would have said something more around, I'm not sure, because I went for anything, you know, I'd give everything a shot. And so I can't say that I would have, you know, done something different. I probably would have done the same.
I think that's perfect too, because I think a lot of people, they just don't try.
Yeah.
They're too afraid to fail. And it's not going to be the end of the world. Just give it a shot. Well, you never know what's going to happen. Walk through that door and you'd be happy, because you will regret if you don't.
Yeah.
You'll always wonder what if.
Yeah.
And that was one of the biggest shifts that I made from shifting to, you know, being an entrepreneur on my own. That was a big thing where it was like, you know, what do I got to lose?
Yeah.
So if it doesn't work out, I'll figure it out. No problem. But but I find a lot of people just get stuck and don't walk through that door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, and actually on that, I think the other thing is that notwithstanding the financial side, I think that we put a lot of focus on not making a change because it may be worse. No, I have to stay at this job because it's a really big income. You know, the decision not to be a CEO, the decision then not to go back into a senior executive role, that has massive impact on everything, including, you know, how many times a week you might go and have dinner. You know, that it's that simple in terms of it's a massive change to your life. I think that in hindsight, I should have done it a long time ago, because it's really not as scary as I thought it was going to be. And you adjust, you know, you change things, your mindset, anything, you adjust. Yeah. Yeah,
it's people don't realize that everybody's afraid of the change, but change is your lifestyle. Everything has like your a year and a half ago, your perspective changed, which is huge. Yeah. Yeah. What's the last TV show that you binge watched?
Oh, half a dozen of them in the last week. Please don't tell my professors. There's one I'm watching right now that's morbidly very good, but Paradise. It has a very weird name because it's nothing to do with what conjures up around that. It's about the end of the world. I can't say any more because I haven't watched it.
Don't want to ruin it.
I don't want it. Yeah. Spoiler alert. Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard that one. I haven't checked it out.
It's very good. Yeah.
Who would be a historical figure? Who would you be?
Be or meet. You know who I would really like to meet?
Who would you like to meet?
He's not historical though, but I would like to meet Zelensky.
Oh, okay.
Like I still check my phone every day to make sure he's okay.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think I think he is a true leader of our time. I think that he is the guy that, there is so much going on in his world, and he has lived up to what it is to lead his people.
Very neat. Yeah. Very
so
cool.
I would love to meet him.
Very cool.
And I hope that I get to see what he does, for the next 30, 40 years, because I just think he's been phenomenal. He is the epitome of true leadership today. He's a guy who is actively involved with his people. He knows what's going on, but he's got the ability to use technology that a lot of leaders don't understand how they can leverage it. At the same time, he's got the influencing skills because he needed to use them with, different leaders around the world who he's got no control over them. And then he's still got his own coaching skills to, work with his teams and make sure that they get up every day and keep doing the good fight. Yeah. So I think he's totally, I've never used the word heads up with you. He is heads up. I think that people need to take their noses out of their devices and connect with people, and he is doing that. He is heads up.
That is actually a very good example. I like that one. Yeah. Where can they find you, Pam?
When I'm not at school, Pamela Hackett at pamelahackett.com.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Right on.
Yeah.
Listen, today has been a really, really an interesting conversation. I think you have so many great insights on how people can be leaders, how the next generation can step into those roles, what it means to be a leader, and your experience, and you could just tell like your experience of what you know in business and economies and all the different industries and markets that you've worked in, and then through all that you have the character to give back. Is you could tell you really want to do that, and you can see that in spades. So I really enjoyed today. So I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us.
Me too.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. I really enjoyed the chat.
I'll tell you in 2.5 years how I go at the degree.
I'm looking forward to it. People watching.
We'll do a follow-up.
You got it. Yeah, that's good. Awesome.